All right, and welcome to another movie review stream. My name is Mark McPherson, film critic for movieswithmark.com, filminquiry.com, and twincitiesgeek.com. So we're coming to the end of September here, and we're getting very close to award season here. I can see it coming up on the horizon. So we got quite a few films to talk about. Not even everything that I wanted to talk about this week, but we're going to cover the most of it. So we got a few films to cover this week. Obviously, the newest one to cover is one opening this weekend, The Wild Robot, the latest film from DreamWorks. We'll also be covering the American remake of Speak No Evil, which came out a few weeks ago. It's based on a Danish film. I'll also be talking about another film I want to talk about for a bit is A Different Man, which somewhat satirizes the disability drama in a very unique way. And in addition to that, I'll also be talking about the latest Netflix films of His Three Daughters, a chamber drama about three women debating the death of their father, and Will and Harper, the documentary on Will Ferrell trying to get used to his trans friend Harper Steele. So we got a lot of ground to cover today. And so yeah, we got earlier. I got a somewhat early review of The Wild Robot. I know it's out today in theaters, but I try to cover it as quickly as I can. I do get early reviews out over at movieswithmark.com, so if you want the earliest ones, you can go check it out there. But if you want to stay up to date on the latest films that'll be coming out this season, and I can tell you at least like 3 I know that are like coming within the next few weeks that I'm going to be getting early screeners of, which I don't quite want to reveal just yet. Not because like they're super secretive. It's just like I don't want to jinx it, just because I've had other ones that they said they were going to come through and they didn't quite, so yeah, I don't want to jinx it. But if you want to stay up to date on the latest movie reviews that are going to be coming up this award season, and there's going to be a lot, to be sure to liking this video just helps it, but I mean just subscribing to stay up to date, that will help as well. Okay, now with the CTAs, let's get straight into the latest film this weekend, The Wild Robot. And I have some notes here ready for it, which I'm going to put on the side here. Okay. Let me just clear my throat for a minute. All right, as we prepare for this DreamWorks review of The Wild Robot, in 3, 2, 1. So, The Wild Robot is the latest film from DreamWorks Animation, and even though it's based on a book, I think this is definitely one of DreamWorks, definitely one of like their better films. And I'm not just saying that just because it's a film that's not a sequel, and it actually has like some, it looks gorgeous and it has a more original story. But I think what I love so much about this film is just that its script is so richly dense, and it's still such a simplistic story for kids to enjoy and families to enjoy. But there are so many thematic layers to it that I think the more that I watch this film, and let's face it, if you're a parent, you're going to end up watching a lot of animated films over and over. And this is honestly a film that I wouldn't mind on repeated viewings, just because I feel like there's a whole bunch of angles that are covered in it that you just don't see in a lot of animated films. Like maybe this is just because after coming off of Inside Out 2, which more or less felt like a retread, and Despicable Me 4, which is mostly just resting on its laurels, but The Wild Robot actually feels like it has a brilliant script to match its brilliant visuals. So, and the thing is, like, there's a lot going on, but it's a fairly easy story to understand. It's about this robot dumped in the wild, goes by Roz as a nickname, voiced by Lupita Nyong'o, and she's just a robot looking for a purpose. She figures that, she's meant to serve humans, but there are no humans on the island that she's landed on. So there's a lot of questions, like, what is my purpose? If I don't have any purpose, do I just go back to where I was sent from? What do I end up doing? So she ends up staying on the island, trying to understand the animals. Eventually she learns to speak all the different languages of the animals, and she decides that after an accident, she will make it her life's work to raise a goose, who she names Bright Bill, voiced by Kit Connor. And she comes to realize that Bright Bill is not like the other geese. He's basically considered like the runt, and they're not sure if he'll be able to survive in the wild. So Roz basically makes it her goal in life to raise this goose so that that this goose can survive and just keep the nature cycle going, even though they don't really mention the nature cycle. It's just they reduce it to a simplicity here of just a robot raising a goose. But of course, from that premise alone, you've got a lot to work with there. You've got like the single parent aspect. You've got that angle of feeling that you don't belong. With like a little bit of like the ugly duckling thing going on. And there are a few obvious jokes that come with that. In particular, Roz gets some parenting advice from a possum called Pinktail, voiced by Catherine O'Hara. And she offers like some sage advice, but not a lot. And the same goes for another companion Roz gains along the way, a fox called Fink, who is voiced by Pedro Pascal, who's more or less just using Roz to kind of like find an easy way to get food out in the wild, but he still offers a little bit of support here and there. So Roz is given support and some advice, but not the best advice and not a lot of support from this environment where animals hunt each other and want to kill each other. And that was something I really loved about like the first act of this film. Like the first act of this film it's not just dark, it's darkly comedic because it leans into the bluntness that would happen within nature, where all these different animals wouldn't exactly live in harmony. They would try to hunt and kill each other, and not all of them would survive. In fact, the event that happens that leads Roz to Bright Bill and is an accident that has some fatal mistakes to it. So so there's very much a lot of earnestness going on in that first act. And it kind of runs, it could run the risk of being cynical, but I feel like there's just enough of that knowing dark humor about the situation so that when we inevitably get to the very sincere and heartfelt moments where Roz connects more with Bright Bill and raises this goose up, and then kind of has to learn to like let go of like this person, not a person, a goose that this robot has raised is not an easy thing. And I love how the film kind of lingers on moments where it feels like the film might end there. Like, because at one point, Roz is successful in inevitably, after training Bright Bill this whole time, is to get him up in the air, and she succeeds at that. But after that, there's still a little bit more time left in the film, like enough room for an entire act, and they address a lot more with that as the film goes on. Like then you start addressing like the empty nest syndrome, and finding a purpose in life when you feel like you've gotten older and that you don't quite belong after you've sacrificed so much of your body to raising someone. So there's a lot of relatable aspects for the parents in there, but don't worry. They don't reduce it all to just like like the little winking parent jokes, and I think the benefit of the film having so many themes like that is that it never feels like it's just resting on like a particular type of joke, or like a familiar scenario. Like there are a few that get evoked with Pinktail, because she has a bunch of other possum babies that she raises, and she makes some dark humor about, I only have a few, some might die, and if they do die, whatever. So, but I like the fact that the single parenting aspect comes through a little bit more subtly, just because there's so much else going on. At the same time, I think narrowing the story to Roz raising Bright Bill gives the film a lot of room to like explore a few aspects, but not linger too much on them and not explain too much of it. Like, of course, because then there's the obvious question. Well, okay, if Roz landed on an island where there is no humans, what happened to the humans in this world? And the film does answer this, but in a way where it's not just like entirely exposition driven. So there's no like moment in like in WALL-E where they explain exactly what happened to Earth. It's one of those things that it's more visually communicated. So like there's a moment where Bright Bill finally takes off with a flight of geese, And one of the places that he flies over is I believe like the Golden Gate Bridge. And once he flies over that, and you see that that it's consumed by water and whales are going over it, it's like, yeah, okay, I get it. I see where this is going, and they don't slow down to explain that. They do show off how like the humans have kind of closed off themselves in these worlds where robots will do everything for them, and it's kind of like it's a dystopian environment for like the humans where they have to close themselves off from the world, but it's also like a world where it feels like nature has kind of taken over more because now this entire island can just like flourish on its own without any human involvement. Well, with the exception of Roz coming into play here. And like there's so much to cover this film, but like one of the aspects that I think is most important to this film is just leaning into the weirdness, because they do bring up, yes, how Bright Bill is a runt, but also that Roz is not like the other robots, and that she is kind of like damaged herself, and they find her defective, that she's using her abilities to contact to speak with animals, which is not something that her type of robot design does. And she's deemed as someone who needs to be changed, who needs to be like, stripped of her data and reset to be more normal. And that comes in the form of the film's only antagonist of another robot called Vantra, played by, voiced by Stephanie Sue. And I love how they reserve this film more for the end, just to like stress the thematic point, instead of like making it a kind of like cat and mouse chase for most of the film of just like this one evil robot trying to chase after Roz for the whole time. And I think, yeah, like it helps to have just so much going on thematically that, you never get bored with the film, and you're always intrigued to see where it goes next and what it wants to explore. This is very much true with the supporting cast, which I feel are very much in their element here. They're used just enough where you never get tired of them, and they never feel like they're just one simple gimmick that you just grow bored with. In particular, like highlights here are like Bill Nighy voicing the Elder Goose called Longneck, who more or less just kind of gives Bright Bill a little bit more guidance, to get up in the air, as well as Roz as well. You have Mark Hamill playing a bear called Thorn. You have Matt Berry playing Paddler, and just it's Matt Berry doing the voice he usually does, and then Ving Rhames as Thunderbolt the Falcon, who trains Bright Bill. So yeah, there's a lot going on within this environment. And speaking of the environment, it looks so lush and beautiful. I love just like the deep colors that they use for like the forest, like all the deep greens, and how when like a forest fire breaks out, there's all these like popping pinks and purples and blues that come about. And then just like the design of like the juxtaposed robot, which, you get a little bit of like Castle in the Sky vibes with like the simplistic face and the long arms and the round body, but it never feels like it's being like too derivative. There's never a moment where it feels like, oh, okay, it's more or less trying to play off this other animated film or this sci-fi aspect. It never feels like it's being that winking for like to like kind of like throw the adult audience a bone, because they really don't have to, because the thematic elements here are so strong and layered and numerous that it'd be impossible for an adult to be bored with this film, just because there's so much to consider with what goes on within like this beautiful animation. So like there's enough there within the script that I think most adults will appreciate, just like the very well written story. While a lot of the kids will be able to like easily find the fun to be had with like a robot raising a goose, and not look too much more deep into it than that. But of course, like I said, they will watch this film more, and they're probably going to grow up with it, and they're probably going to come back to it and be like, wow, there's a lot more happening in this film than I first thought when I saw it as a kid. So I'd be very interested to see what happens with the kids who grew up with this film and then return to it years later to find out, yeah, there's more going on than just the robot goose story. Just fantastic direction here from Chris Sanders, which I don't think much has to be said about Sanders for, his history of like, working on other DreamWorks films and, like particularly How to Train Your Dragon. that should be enough of a selling point there. But yeah, like this is top tier DreamWorks. This is, it's beautiful animation. It's a very richly thematic script. It's got some great performances, and it just has like a very genuine nature to it, where it doesn't feel like it's falling back on like pop culture nods or aping off, or even just aping off other animated films. It does feel like it's in its own element, and doing its own thing in a way that, a lot of most mainstream animated films don't tend to do. You do tend to see this type of work within a lot more like independent animated films, but for this type of story to come out of DreamWorks, just looking as amazing as it does and playing as great as it does, it's just fantastic. This is, I dare say, like this is up there with probably like my favorite DreamWorks animated film, and easily like I think my favorite Chris Sanders film. So yeah, the Wild Robot is a must watch animated film from DreamWorks. So The Wild Robot is currently playing in theaters this weekend. And by the way, like go. I have not looked too much of the marketing for this film, but I don't think it's that big. I feel like I had to remind a few people that this film was coming out, but yeah, don't sleep on it, because I get the feeling that it might get lost. It might get lost during the weekend, just because like Megalopolis is coming out this weekend. There's a few others hanging around, like like the bigger blockbusters are still hanging in there, like with like Speak No Evil, and I think Deadpool and Wolverine is still going pretty strong. So I'm curious to see how it'll do during this weekend. I don't think it'll bomb per se. Like, I mean, it's different rules, when you go with like bigger studio blockbusters, but it does deserve to be seen, and I hope that nobody sleeps on this film, because it might get buried with like the other animated films that are coming out later this year. So don't sleep on it. Okay. Let me get a drink here and we'll talk about A Different Man. One moment here. I'm going to clear my throat, so I'm going to mute the mic. Okay, and we're back. All right, so let's get talking about A Different Man, a new film from A24. Get my notes up here. Another drink of water. And here we go. In 3, 2, 1. So A Different Man is a different type of film that feels like it has some commentary to lob at the what's the best way, like kind of like the drama that evokes a lot of emotion from like disabilities and disorders, and kind of like turns it on its head a little bit. It's a very it's a very tricky film at times. Like, you think you have it figured out at certain points, and then there's something else that comes in and just keeps changing it and making it so much more interesting and fascinating, with kind of like almost like a quiet satire that goes on with it within it, even though there's a lot happening. So the film is all about this struggling actor called Edward, played by Sebastian Stan, who has the condition known as neurofibromatosis. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's basically a condition where you have like a bunch of like benign tumors and loose skin on your face, so that your face basically looks like much bigger and lumpier, like it has a lot more skin on it. Which very much is a real condition here, but of course, Sebastian Stan, because he's playing this character, he has like the makeup and the prosthetics on to make him look like he has this condition. And he's struggling. He's struggling to find work that isn't just, trying to like showcase his condition. Like all he can find is like acting in infomercials in which, they want that condition. He tries to connect with his next door neighbor, Ingrid, played by Renata Rainsfjord. And like, yeah, like she's clearly into him, but he's, very nervous and not sure that, he can make a romance like this work. Almost like a little bit of a Beauty and the Beast type thing going on here. And hang on to that, like put a pin in that. I'll come back to that in a moment. But Edward is just basically not comfortable with himself, where he feels the need to like speak up, when he's hurt, or report like a leak that's coming from his upstairs neighbors in his apartment. So he just doesn't have the confidence. So when like his doctors say that, hey, we have this surgery that we can do, which can remove all that excess skin, and make you look, like you have like a typical face, without, the typical condition of neurofibromatosis. So like, of course, Edward jumps at this chance, and eventually his skin starts peeling off, almost kind of like I thought it was going to go into like body horror territory, which it kind of does, the way that it peels that off. And then of course, under all that, he's Sebastian Stan. So within the blink of an eye, like his life changes immediately. And instead of, being in like an apartment where the roof is leaky and struggling for work, now he's like a real estate agent who works who has a very upscale apartment. And life seems to have turned around for him. And he's tried to like turn around everything about himself. Like he's not even taken the name Edward anymore. Like he's changed it entirely. So having changed everything about himself, he's hoping that, maybe Ingrid would accept him now that he doesn't have this condition, so playing up the, like the kind of like Beauty and the Beast angle, of like, like I was a beast, and then, like the curse was lifted and now I look beautiful like this. But what's fascinating about what this film does is that, that cure, that, like the typical ending of like Beauty and the Beast, that happens halfway through. And the film kind of answers this question of like, okay, well, what would happen after that? Like, because I'm sure like a lot of people watch Beauty and the Beast, they're kind of like, oh, I kind of found him more attractive as the Beast. I don't know why he had to become a man. Like, what's life going to be like for him after that? What happens, can he get used to like being in this new form where he's more attractive now? Or is it just going to eat away at him? And it more or less kind of does. Like he tries to get back into the good graces of Ingrid, but not by being himself. He doesn't tell him that he was the same person with the condition that she originally fell in love with. Which is unfortunate because she has written a screenplay all about falling in love with for someone with this condition. So even though Sebastian Stan's character gets cast in this, he has to end up wearing prosthetics, and it feels like he's playing up the same role as before, except now it doesn't feel as genuine. It doesn't feel like he's being himself and he's denying him this identity for himself. But he probably figures like, no matter, I could still get in the good graces with Ingrid. But then halfway through the film, everything changes with the arrival of Oswald, played by Adam Pearson, who is somebody who's a real life actor who does have neurofibromatosis. So once he comes onto to the scene, like it changes everything. And I don't just mean that for Edward's life. I mean just for like the whole tone of the film. Because of the first half, you've basically been watching this person, an actor pretending to have this condition, and then watching it like fade away. So now that we have Pearson's character come in, now we have like a direct comparison, almost as kind of like it's holding up a mirror saying like, how effective is this drama when someone with this condition is involved? And fittingly, Oswald, Adam Pearson's character, ends up being a consultant on this play. And much to Edward's chagrin, Oswald ends up being a real charmer. He's like everyone loves him. He's outgoing. He offers very, very earnest but very, very gentle advice. Like he doesn't want to step on Edward's toes here. He realizes like, yeah, you're an accomplished actor, and I know you're trying to do a bit. But I'm just going to give a little bit of insight here, and I'm going to offer, a little bit of my intellect here, which he does have a lot of it, which impresses Ingrid pretty quick. And and you can kind of see where this is going. Like Oswald is like slowly stealing away the life that Edward had denied himself. So he basically eats away at Edward with like this self-doubt for having accepted such like an easy life and an easy exit, rather than live with this condition where, if he had just been a little bit more outgoing, he could have had the life of Oswald. And Oswald was just like a rising talent of an actor. He reads a lot. He performs karaoke. He knows a lot of people. He's just generally fun to be around. Like they literally have beers with him a few times, and he just seems like the greatest guy to hang out with. So it's like this direct. It's almost like a very somewhat subtle, but also like very direct condemnation of how like we easily equate like beauty with like success and who people love and who they want to gravitate towards, and that kind of like myth that kind of like seemed to like have built up with Beauty and the Beast kind of shatters Edward's perceptions and his world, but to a degree where it's like he's doing it to himself. Like Oswald doesn't want to make the world worse for Edward, but Oswald just kind of deserves a lot of like what he gets in this film. Like he ends up taking over the role from Edward because he's more genuine in that type of role. He ends up seducing Ingrid more easily just because he's such a great guy. That Edward just beats himself up, and his life spirals more and more out of control, where he's just got to try to learn to to be more open and be more honest, otherwise it's going to eat him up inside. And it takes some very unorthodox routes. There are some clashes here and there. There's some there's some very like awkward moments between them, but there's always like that questioning of like how effective, like what would a play like that say about disability, when someone has like this condition and they bring it out there. And I feel like without even just being that like cynical or vicious, the film kind of like attacks that idea of like, having like big name actors being in roles where they're meant to portray someone with a disability, and how they kind of like lay into a lot of the pity that gets associated with that. In addition to that, I think there's also a bit of a conversation to have about how about like trying to remove that condition and trying to remove that part of your personality within that. So like I was kind of like relating a little bit of that to the autism cure movement, but it also kind of like plays a lot into Adam Pearson as a person. Like he's been very much involved in campaigns to be against like bullying for people who look different from you. He's and he's a very active actor. Like he's actually worked a lot before with this director Aaron Schimberg. And just he has such a natural presence. Like, and I've seen Pearson like in a few films. You might have seen him too. He's been in films like Under the Skin, which is a fascinating film. I actually absolutely loved it. And he's been like in a few smaller films here and there. And some that of course do play into his condition, but A Different Man, I think, is a film that kind of like plays into his condition in a very unique way, where it feels like it turns the camera, it kind of like turns the camera around on the audience, because like like we're so used to like seeing like other actors depict different disabilities and disorders and conditions on the screen, but then what happens when someone else who actually has this condition comes on the screen, and then what now we can compare them, and now we can kind of like question this topic on like a deeper level. I feel like the film, if I had like a negative criticism of the film, I think it would be that it gets a little bit lost in it and how it tries to search around for different angles within this narrative to explore different thematic thread lines, and I feel like some might get lost here and there, but I think it always keeps it interesting. Like there's definitely something building with how Oswald becomes more loved and Edward becomes just more riddled with like self-hatred. That it's a fascinating story in its own right, but just everything about the way it's framed, and I think the way that it reflects the world and how we look at like these kind of disability, condition, and disorder dramas, it changes a lot, and it's such like a fascinatingly complex film in terms of like all the directions that it goes, that I'm honestly kind of curious to watch it like 2 or 3 more times just to see like where I fall and where I feel like are the strongest elements that are evoked from it. But I think like probably the simplest way to like, if you just like need like a very cut and dry way to kind of like approach this film, I would say like it's a pretty good satirization of Beauty and the Beast, considering that they bring that narrative up at several times and also critique it at the same time, which is very much what A Different Man is doing. So it's very much a fascinating film that does a good job, like not just like scrutinizing those types of dramas, but kind of, like I said, holding up a mirror to an audience who doesn't have that condition and forcing us to question it on a much deeper and more uncomfortable level, I think, as kind of like the film goes on. So yeah, this is a deeply fascinating film that I loved every single minute of. Its surreal weirdness and drama and comedy. It's such a wonderful little film. Okay. So A Different Man, I think, should still be playing in some theaters right now. It might not be. It's an A24 film, so they kind of come and go. So you kind of got to keep an eye out for it. But if it does pop up on it'll probably pop up on like Max at some point later this year. Be sure not to miss it. I got a comment here from Sucked. A Different Man kind of reminded me of a cynical modern-day Eternal Sunshine with the sci-fi fantasy tech and the reality of relationships and people. Loved it. Felt like a funny horror anthology tale as well. That is actually a really good comparison now that I think about it. Yeah, because Eternal Sunshine was very much about that aspect of like kind of like denying that self and also more or less kind of retooling like a relationship and not having it go the way that you think it's gonna go. So yeah, that is actually a very, very apt comparison, I'd say. I mean, I don't want to like reduce it, but yeah, like thematically, like that's actually a perfect. God, that'd be a great double feature. Oh my God, just like surreal, self-questioning, existential dramas that turn the genres on their head with sci-fi tech. A little bit of sci-fi tech, a little bit. Like it's not like super I want to stress that it's not like super future or anything like that. Like it's mostly just like, like this one miracle cure for this condition. So just to make that clear. All right, let's talk about let's switch in gears there. We went from an animated film to a surreal drama to let's just go to like a horror thriller. Well, kind of a horror thriller. It's kind of more action thriller. I'll get into it. It's a whole thing. Let me just hydrate up there. All right. Okay, here we go. With the remake of Speak No Evil in 3, 2, 1. So Speak No Evil is the American remake of the Danish film of the same name. The Danish film was directed by Christian Dartrup, and this new remake is directed by James Watkins, who previously directed films like The Woman in Black. Now, the original Danish film, if you haven't seen it, you should definitely see it. It's definitely a horror film that stuck with me for the longest time, because it was a film all about this family who unwittingly accepts invitations from this other family that they meet on vacation, who are fairly kind. They're inviting, they're good for conversations, and they seem like very interesting and intriguing people. So they meet them on vacation, and they're like, they're lured over to their country home to kind of like, just relax with them, for a little bit of more of a vacation, and so the families can get to know each other. But of course, as their trip goes on, like, there's something else lurking under the surface, and they quickly learn that this family is actually pretty abusive and have a very, very dark secret that they hide that turns very, very brutal and at least a very unsettling ending for this family's trip to visiting another family. Now, what I loved so much about the Danish film is that it proceeds along in a manner where, in like a fairly a subtle manner. Like, there are little clues here and there that like this inviting family is not what they seem, but they're kind of like they're a little bit, they're a little bit more nuanced. Like, you have to kind of like closely pay attention. Like at one point, like the mother is a vegetarian. He tries to like force her to eat some meat, but in a way he's just kind of like, oh, come on, just try a little, little. And there's like, and of course, because she doesn't want to be rude, she's like, oh, okay, I guess I will. And of course, as that keeps going on, it keeps snowballing until it gets to like this very gruesome point. But as it keeps going, I think it plays more into like this this more primal aspect of humanity in how this like family basically like guts and tries to steal the life of another family, while also kind of like taking like some creepy aspects of like of leaning into like the sex of this couple, and how like their lives are a little bit more complicated, and how they're a little bit too docile about what happens in their lives. So there's a lot going on in the Danish version of Speak No Evil, but in the American version, it feels like it's on steroids. It feels like it's I know this is a little bit of like a stereotype, but like it feels like it's dumbing down the original like for an American audience. And I think just because like they play up everything, like there's familiar scenes that happen within this American version, like almost like beat for beat, but they're played up to like such a high level where they feel like a little bit too intense, while at the same time not exploring enough. So like the unfortunate family who gets lured in is played by so like there's the mother, Louise, played by Mackenzie Davis, who she's vegetarian, she's frustrated, she's had an affair. You have Ben, played by Scoot McNairy, who tries to be a loving father, but he finds himself frustrated with trying to like assert his masculinity, isn't sure that he can pull it off, so he's very insecure. And they have a daughter called Agnes. Now the family that lures them in here, they're extreme. Like, they're not just like nice like in the Danish version. They're like like you can clearly tell like they're on like something. So like the family is composed of Patty, played by James McAvoy, who has just dialed up his acting to 11 here, and I think that's probably the most likable thing about the film is just McAvoy goes full on crazy in this role. Like, he has like this grin that will never leave, and these just like these like always open eyes that are just like freaky, the way that he has such exuberance. His wife Clara, played by Iceline Francoisi, I believe I'm pronouncing it correctly, more or less just goes with the flow. Like, she's also shares a little bit of that same energy. And the one aspect that kind of throws them off, that should be like the first big clue, is like their son, Ant, who can't speak because he has a small tongue, which makes it hard for him to talk. So Ant can't say a lot. And of course, you can sense like what's happening. You're like, okay, Ant clearly has something that he's trying to tell this family, but they won't listen. Something sinister is going on here. So it's very much the same story that happens within the Danish version, like complete with all like the same beats of like, Patty trying to like, offer up some meat. There's another awkward scene where like the kids are dancing and Patty gets like viciously drunk and angry. That scene is dialed up even higher, so it's even more intense and uncomfortable. And another scene I thought kind of like set the tone for this film about how it was kind of going to be it wasn't, I knew it wasn't going to go that far, is the scene where Patty and Clara invite Luis and Ben out for dinner. And while they're out to dinner, Patty and Clara get like very sexual, but not like sexual enough. Like they get very into dancing, and like they try to like simulate a blowjob under the table at one point, but then they always have like this gotcha moments, like, you know, like like we're kidding, we're not really doing this in front of you, we're not that weird. The problem with this film though is there are so many of those fake outs with this couple. Like at one point, like, you know, after they come out here and, like, Louisa's cut her hand and she realizes that Patty's a doctor. It's like, Patty, you're a doctor. Can you look at my hand? It's like, oh, I'm not a doctor. I don't know where you got the idea I'm a doctor. It's like, wait, really? It's like, oh, I'm kidding. And there are other moments like that where it's like, oh, should we do this? Oh, I'm kidding. It's like, oh, maybe we'll force you here. Maybe we'll kill you. Just kidding. It's like, and it gets to such a degree where you're just kind of like, would you just start stabbing the family already? Would you just do? I'm getting tired of, like, about 2/3 of the way through, I'm getting tired of all like the fake outs here. And I think probably like the biggest insult, I think, to, you know, to like adapting the Danish version is that this film completely changes the ending. I don't mean like they just changed a few things here and there, like up to like the point where like the revelation is made about what like Patty and Clara are actually doing. It's mostly a faithful adaptation for replicating a lot of the same scenes and a lot of the same dialogue. But once it gets to that moment of revelation, it feels like the film just turns into a completely different movie. It goes from being like a psychological horror thriller to just an action horror film. Because then after that, it turns into like a running through the house, terrified, trying to, you know, fight for your life type of action horror film in which Patty and Clara have to be defeated in like the most brutal way possible, and the son gets revenge on the, you know, his, you know, supposed parents in this scenario, and it feels like it changes gears completely, where it's trying to be an audience pleaser. And to the film's credit, I think it does that decently enough, because at least like the audience that I saw with it, they were getting really into it. They were excited. They're like, oh, don't go in there. It's one of those, how do I put it? It's one of those don't go in there, scream back at the screen movies, where, you know, like horror characters are like running and they're like, you're saying, oh, don't go this way, don't go that way, and then when they finally assault the killer, you're just kind of like, yes, they killed the killer, they did it, they're like happy. And it's like, is this really the remake of Speak No Evil, in which like it ends on a very dark note? Like I'll reveal a little bit of a spoiler here just so people know where I'm coming from here, but in the original Danish version, the family don't make it out alive. Like the whole bit is that the corrupted family who try to like lead other families out to their house, they basically want to kill off the family and then keep the child and cut off their tongue so that they can't tell anybody that they've, you know, stolen this child that they've tried to make their own. And that actually happens at the end of the Danish version. But in this American version, the kid who got his tongue cut out gets to smash in the parents' heads with a cinder block. And it's just like, there's nothing left to like contemplate at that moment. You're just watching, you know, this entirely different type of film of, you know, these victims fleeing from their killers, you know, like it's a straight up slasher movie at times. And I know that, you know, like I know that for like an American audience who hasn't seen the Danish version, they're probably going to come into this film and they're probably going to leave it, you know, enjoying it as like a kind of, you know, running away from like the killer type of slasher film. But it's so hard for me not to think of the Danish version, which had so much to say, and it also felt like it had more guts with wanting to tackle like just like the darker ending, and how it wasn't afraid to lean into more aspects of the feuding couple's like sex life, and how it takes like a very strange and uncomfortable turn here. They completely avoid that in this film. It feels like this film is trying to avoid too much of the psychological darkness and even like some of like the psychosexual angles that are present here. And I think like just removing those key elements, it might still be a fine film for a lot of people, but it just feels like such a watered down and reduced version of a horror film that felt like it was saying a lot. And here, this version of Speak No Evil is just saying like, hey, isn't James McAvoy a pretty eccentric killer? And it's like, yeah, he is, but like there's not a lot of meat to this film when compared to the Danish version, which and I'm sorry, I don't want to be that guy who's like, oh, the original international version was better, but it really is like I could not stop thinking about that film when I first watched it, and it was just because it was so grisly, and it just like it leaves an impression, it just haunts you days after. But after watching this version of Speak No Evil, all I could think about was just like, yeah, James McAvoy is a good killer, but I didn't really get a lot to contemplate out of that scenario. And I felt a little bit robbed too, because like up until that point, there was I could feel the film was like trying something, because like I noticed there was a distinct lack of music before it gets to like the more action oriented elements of the third act. There's a lack of music. It just like lets scenes unfold as they are, and I thought that was kind of interesting. But there's also some choppy editing that's going on here, where it feels like there were some scenes in between that they were just kind of like diced out really quickly, and we just like jumped to other scenes way too quickly, and just you kind of gotta like, it feels like it's stumbling around to like keep up with itself and keep it interesting while still hitting all the same scenes as the original. So it just feels like a mess at times. Like, it does have its moments. I do like McAvoy's performance. He does play off like Scoot McNairy pretty well. The kids are pretty good actors here. I think they have just the right amount of like concern and navigating their way through like intense moments. But it's just like, it's an entirely different tone from the original that I just couldn't shake. So I would say if you haven't seen the Danish version, you will probably like the American Speak No Evil. But after that, I would say go watch the Danish version, because like I got a lot more out of that film than I did from this picture, which just feels like a kind of more or less just like an action horror film that doesn't really have a lot to consider beyond just McAvoy's performance. So yeah, very good performances in a film that is just tonally and thematically not as engaging as the material that it's drawing from. So Speak No Evil, I think, is still playing in theaters right now. I think it's been doing pretty well, just because the marketing for there's a joke. Like, if you've been going to the theaters pretty regularly for the past month or so, there's a running joke that this trailer plays in front of every single damn film, which it was, which is kind of funny, because like up until like August, there was like no trailer for this movie, and now and then like when August rolled around, there was nothing but that trailer for that film. It was almost like the marketing people like fell asleep, and they're like, oh crap, we haven't been advertising, it comes out in a month, quick, get the trailer out in front of every film immediately. So like the trailer has more or less kind of become like the biggest joke with that film. Let's see, reading from the chat here, Sluck said, I felt okay with the twist of this remake, as in a way to say Tesla-loving Americans would be way more paranoid and violent to be messed with, though the comedic violence seemed a bit much by the end. It really did. Like, I think, like, when you get to the moment where like audiences are cheering, like it removes the intensity. Like it turns into what I used to call like a lot of the Conjuring verse horror films, which is a roller coaster movie, which is, you don't go there so much to be like terrified so much as you go there to participate the way that you would in like a roller coaster, like you see what's going to happen, you see what's coming up in front of you, so you raise your hands and you get ready to scream really loud as the moment happens that is going to happen, with a great anticipation. So yeah, Speak No Evil is definitely in that camp of film. Um, but yeah, just like, when comparing to the Danish version, it feels so lacking. I wish I could like it more. I think probably if I didn't see the original, I might like this film because it is like it gets really goofy at times. Yeah. We have another chatter here. Corian says, I've actually read The Wild Robot, and it's honestly a very solid children's novel. And I mean, yeah, like I haven't read the novel, but it does seem like it has like a very easy to understand story. Robot in the wild raising an animal. So, but yeah, like the fact that they could get so much material and so much to explore, just from that the premise from that book. Like it really felt like Chris Sanders just kind of like took that material and ran with it in the right direction and decided like, oh yeah, what can we explore here? Well, yeah, there's single parenthood. There's obviously the juxtaposition of tech and nature, and then obviously nurture versus nature. But what else could we do with that? What other characters could we explore? What other aspects are there to consider? Could we maybe do like an empty nest type syndrome? Like I said, so much going on within this film. That it feels like someone actually took the time to look at that book and say, yeah, if we're gonna do a feature film, we gotta find more than just like some jokes to extend this runtime. There's stuff we can do with it. We could explore different angles. We can give the audience something more to bite on while still retaining a fairly easy to understand story for kids. I really do hope it's a success this weekend. I really do. Because like it's definitely DreamWorks' best film to date. I know like some people might debate this, but like right now the forefront of my mind, Wild Robot is the top. I don't think I've ever thought that much about like a DreamWorks film after having seen one like this. Like I've definitely thought about like the staging and like the funny aspects and some of their thematic cores for like the other films, like Over the Hedge and stuff like The Bad Guys, which is just like kind of more or less a fun heist film, which is kind of interesting to watch. But yeah, this is like the first film where it's like, yeah, there's actually stuff worth pondering and considering about it. So, yeah, the kids who grew up with this, they're gonna make some some very detailed video essays about it in the future. Okay. All right, let's get to our next film here. Now let's go more into like straight up drama. We covered a little bit of like drama comedy, The Different Man, but now we're going to go into some more straight up drama, even though there is some comedy in it. All right, so here we go with His Three Daughters in 3, 2, 1. So His Three Daughters is the latest drama by director Azal Jacobs, who has previously directed films like French Exit and The Lovers, which were very dialogue-heavy dramas, which I thought were okay. I thought they had interesting characters and interesting angles to explore, and there was just enough going on where I was engaged. But I think His Three Daughters might probably be one of his like best films, just because of like everything about the way that he stages this chamber drama about these three adult sisters who have come together for their father, who is in the final days and is dying within like this apartment. Now, what makes the film so great? Like, first, like the casting is amazing here. You have Carrie Coon playing Katie, who's a very assertive woman who gets very frustrated with her sisters for not being more on top of handling the arrangements for their father. Like, the inciting incident right from the beginning is that she's pissed off that they didn't get a DNR signed. So now it's going to make it much more difficult to handle dad being taken care of by a nurse, by nurses and caregivers. So she's just frustrated with the whole situation. Then you have Rachel, played by Natasha Lyonne, who has been living with her father all this time for many, many years, and she's a bit of a stoner. She smokes weed in the house, and she's engaged with sports. She plays a lot of bets. She's very engaged with that, and she loved doing that with her dad. But now that she knows that her father is coming to the end of his life, she basically can't bring herself to go into his bedroom and kind of like be by his side while he's kind of dying, while the machine that is attached to him just keeps beeping the whole time. So here's a woman who's spent her whole life with her father and then just can't bear to see him in this state, even though she's lived with him, up to this moment. And then you have Christine, played by Elizabeth Olsen, who's kind of like the glue for this family, more or less. She's a very emotional mother who, she cares about her kids a lot, and even while she's spending time with her sisters, caring for her father, she still keeps in contact with her young child, and she's very warm and calming around her. But at the same time, like, she's also very, she's very sad about the situation, and she's struggling with her emotions. She cries a lot, and I mean, Elizabeth Olsen, she's playing up to her strengths here. Like, she feels like she has like a face just kind of like built for tears and for crying, where she can just like amass it on cue, and it always feels believable. Like, she's just struggling to keep everything together here, because like, even though like she kind of like shows up mostly in tears the first time we see her, she does try to keep everything together. Like, when fights break out between Katie and Rachel, which happens often, she tries to get between them. She tries to de-escalate as much as she can. She tries to center herself with yoga. There's a lot to her. So most of the film takes place in the apartment, with Rachel occasionally going outside into the courtyard for having a smoke, even though there's a guard out there who keeps telling her you can't smoke out here. And it's mostly just these three sisters just hanging out with each other, just struggling to get used to the fact that their dad is not going to be alive anymore. And at the same time, they also reveal a little bit more about themselves and about each other. They air out their grievances and their frustrations and misunderstandings, and it just plays up to all their strengths. Like I said, Elizabeth Olsen is great for these very emotional roles, but Natasha Lyonne just has like that perfect raspy voice where she feels like, someone who's believable, that they would just hang out all day and like smoke weed and just want to talk sports all day. She has that very like lived in quality, and not just to the way that she talks to other people, but like the way that she dresses and the way that she hangs out in the courtyard and has just casual banter with like the other residents who come out there. Just talking about like upcoming sporting events and bets, and just smoking weed, and just, feeling like just, someone who's been here her whole life. And she very much will be, as she learns that, she's going to be the one who gets to take control of this rent-controlled apartment. And then, of course, Carrie Coon does very much play up her motherly angle here by stressing about trying to write an obituary for her father, and just not finding much help from others. Like, they try to offer help. Like, Rachel does offer like some words to describe their father, and while it is somewhat helpful, Katie also is, just still can't make it work, and she feels like she very much needs her family in her life to help her out with like this tough situation, where she feels like she's not just losing control of of her other like sisters and losing her father, but just losing control of her life in general. And just like it's very much a hangout film where you just get to hang around these characters, you get to know them, you get to love them, you get to appreciate their very passionate performances that easily go from just like like quiet snickering about like in jokes that they can relate to just shouting and yelling at each other for like getting stuff wrong, or not being as present, or not taking the situation as seriously, even though they're all just struggling to deal with it in their own different ways. And I think worth noting too is J.O. Sanders, who plays the dying father here. Like, there is one scene he has where he kind of like more or less gets to have like a monologue as kind of like a final goodbye to his daughters, in a kind of in a little bit of like of like a surreal way, where it's like kind of like he's present, but he's also kind of not present. It makes a lot more sense when you see the film, but like the way that this movie's staged, it you know, when you look at it, you first think, okay, is this a play? Is this based on a play? And you can understand, because like it's like I said, it's a chamber drama. It mostly centers around the apartment and these three characters just bickering about what's the best way to handle, you know, the death of their father. But no, this is actually an original screenplay, you know, by Jacobs, and it just and it very well could be adapted into a play, and it'd probably be a damn good play, just because this script. I mean, yeah, I think it would determine who you get in the roles, because this is a pretty damn good script. But I think what makes it work best is just the all-star performances here. Like Carrie Coon, Natasha Lyonne, and Elizabeth Olsen all shine in this film. They're all playing up to their strengths. They're fascinating to watch. They have just great back and forth dialogue here. There's little details to their performances that just makes them unique. That it's enlightening just to like hang around with them. And like, just like the little details I found just so fascinating. Like, there's a moment where Rachel comes into a room and Christina is just sitting down after having just coming out of Dad's room with her back to the wall. And it's just like taking a moment to like relax her eyes and rest. And Rachel immediately just talks to her and says, "Oh my God, did Dad die?" And Christina just realizes in the moment, like, oh, like the way she's sitting, it kind of looks like she just experienced Dad. And it's like, oh no, that's it. That didn't happen. I'm just resting. So I think it plays into a little bit of like the comedy here and there, while just finding just the right punchlines within like the sincere drama to make it work. In particular, when it gets to like the final scene where all the sisters, you know, have faced the inevitable, and they, you know, they offer up their goodbyes. There's this kind of like gentle and somber song, like kind of like nursery rhyme that they sing together. And it ends on like the perfect punchline where like they're trying to like mimic the sound of a duck, and they try to like make it sound like the machines that Dad was on, which is like it's one of those like those in jokes that are appropriate for like a grieving family, where it feels like a decent like a decent celebration of life, or it feels like it's very much appropriate to make that type of joke. So yeah, as very much like a chamber drama hangout film, this is a fantastic cast, and they're all playing to their strengths here. And I absolutely love Jacob's direction here, which manages to get the absolute best performances out of this type of script. So His Three Daughters is currently playing on Netflix. Go check it out. Let's see, reading from the chat here. I agree with His Three Daughters. Was very effective. Some people didn't like the scenes with the boyfriend or the very end with the dad, but I thought it broke the film up better and laid a sobering reality. Yeah, and in particular, I didn't want to bring up the scene with the boyfriend so much because I wanted to be a little bit of surprise. But yeah, the scene with the boyfriend is great because it's the first, like, third party who is actually, like, really, really critical of the way that, like, Katie has been handling the situation and how they think they know everything about Rachel's father when really they haven't been present and they don't grasp it. So I really like the way that he bit back there and how a very vicious and fiery argument comes from there, which is all motivated just by like just frustration and passion, and it plays out so wonderfully. You don't see often in these kinds of indie movies. Yeah, just well, I think you mean the more the deal with the dad. Yeah, I didn't quite want to reveal what happens with the father, but I feel like that's like the perfect staging for the father. Because like I was thinking like you could just picture how like that scene would unfold in like in a stage production, because you'd have that scene where, you know, like they frame it the way that it is in the film, where like the father gets up from his chair and he delivers the monologue and, you know, talks about, you know, like the love of his life and, you know, just watching over his daughters. as the spotlight zooms in on him, and then you see like a spotlight on the other side where like he's still in the chair and the daughters are crowding around him and it's terrified, and the other spotlight just kind of like gets closer and closer together until he eventually fades out. It's it's like I said, it's a film that feels like it's built for like a pretty good stage play. And it very well might be. If there was a local production of it, I'd love to see it, because this is a really good script. Continuing on here, it reminded me of when you have long, meaningful conversations with family members you haven't seen for a long time. Yeah, and just like great dialogue, and I think that's one of the things that I've always kind of admired about Jacob's films, is just that he does find fascinating characters, and he does find some really good and fairly natural dialogue for his characters. Like, I was a little bit lukewarm on French Exit, but I couldn't stop thinking about those characters. I couldn't stop thinking about like the way that they conversed and the exchanges they had. That it stuck with me for a long time. So it did feel stagey. Yes, it's. And I think that just comes from like like the very one setting that they have here. But yeah, that, like I said, not a bad thing. I mean, hey, Jacobs could take this script and make it into a stage play, which I would definitely watch. All right, we only got one film left, and it's one that's not too hard to talk about. Well, I mean, it is and it isn't. Like it isn't in the same that like there's a lot going on, but there's not like much of like the plot to comprehend here. Let me just get some notes up here. Just remembered I didn't have the director here. Yeah, I was trying to think who the director was. It was like, it was Josh Greenbaum. And I was trying to think of what else he's written. I think he was with? Yeah, he was on a lot of other comedy stuff. Like, was it Bless This Mess and Barb and Star. Great films. Okay, let me get the rest of the notes up here. Okay. So here we go with our final review of the stream, Will and Harper. In 3, 2, 1. So Will and Harper is a documentary road trip starring Will Ferrell and Harper Steele. Now, everybody knows who Will Ferrell is. I'm sure like he needs no introduction for this film. But Harper Steele might, just because well for two reasons. One is because Harper Steele was very much a woman who operated behind the scenes. She was a writer on Saturday Night Live. She stuck by Will Ferrell for a lot of his projects, and in fact, as the film begins, Ferrell actually outlines a lot of the types of films that they were involved with, and he kind of like more or less kind of blames her for saying like, hey, all that stuff I was in, you want to know who was responsible for that? That's Harper's doing. But the other reason that a lot of people might not know who Harper Steele is because she is a fairly recently transitioned woman. Before this, she was known as Andrew Steele, and a few years ago, she decided to come out as transgender, and she went about changing her gender, and she realized that this might be a rocky transition, not so much for herself but for others to accept her. So she basically made this big announcement that she sent out to all her friends saying like, hey, I'm going to be transitioning to a woman now, and I understand like it might be difficult for some of you to accept, but this is something that I got to do, and I try not to be political, but now that I am becoming like a transgender woman, now my life is going to be very political, so I just thought I'd all let you know, and the least you could do is just try to address me as such, and like get the pronouns right. So Will Ferrell, having learned this, was very intrigued because he had worked with Harper for such a long time, and he was like, well, how do I get used to my friend? Like, what do I say? What should I do with them? And it all comes out of a spot of love, where it's just like he wants to do what's right for Harper and still be the friend that he's always been. That the same person who they would trade jokes with, how they'd write sketches on SNL, how they'd bicker about beer and go into bars and have lots of drinks and stuff like that. They're very much the same people, but at the same time, Will realizes that things are different now, and we kind of got to address this. And the thing is, like, I love how Will wants to be open with it, but he doesn't want to be like direct with it. He wants to kind of like ease Harper into this. So the best way that they find to do this is just to take a road trip where they go to a lot of familiar spots and also a lot of like new spots as well, to try to get used to Harper in this with her new gender, as being a woman. So they go to there's a lot of like cameos in the film. Like they end up like contacting Kristen Wiig over the phone and say like, hey, you should make a cute little theme song for this film, which he does reveal by the end of the film. They stop by Saturday Night Live, where they visit with a few people who work there, and they discuss what it was like working there, and they share like some warm memories. But then when they get back, every time they get back on the road, that's like when it's like kind of like the question and answer time, where Will just kind of like cautiously asks about, how did you know when you want to transition to a woman? What aspects of surgery were you considering? What thoughts were going through your head? And just a lot of like curious questions that are asked like very cautiously and innocently, but also in a manner that's like earnest and honest, where Harper's like, it's like yeah, like bring him up. Right? I'm not afraid. I'm in my 60s. I've faced a lot of stuff. Go ahead, ask me anything. And I love that Will accepts that offer, and he doesn't try to like pussyfoot around a lot of stuff with Harper. He actually asks her questions that are on his mind and stuff that he's wondering about. At the same time, he still finds just the right moments to crack jokes. Like at one point, when he's asking about Harper's breasts, he brings up how like how is it like having your new rack and then going into Nordstrom rack, and it's just one of those like really silly jokes that like Harper just kind of like turns to Will and is just like, okay, that's actually a pretty good joke. And then they both kind of like turn to the camera and then try to like explain the joke to kind of like like elongate it further by saying like, oh, Will just wrote like the best joke of the year, here's how it works. You see, rack is like they just go into like this whole bit where there are a lot of like sweet moments like that where they're just they connect so well. At the same time, there is some drama in this film where it doesn't shy away from the aspects where Will does stumble, because at one point during the trip, Will Ferrell puts on like his Sherlock outfit from like the recent film that he was working on, that Sherlock that Sherlock Holmes film from like a few years back. He puts it on and goes into like this Texas steak joint where they have like one of those like like eat this much meat in an hour and it's free. And he decides to accept the challenge of Sherlock Holmes. And of course, when he does it like it's a big production, they put you up on a big table and they time it. So he goes at it dressed as Sherlock Holmes, but Harper is sitting right across the table from him. And Harper's looking out at the audience, who are all like kind of like filming Will Ferrell and taking photos and video. And she knows what's going to happen. She knows the moment that those photos go online, she knows that transphobia is going to happen there. She knows that Will Ferrell is going to get criticized for being seen with a trans woman, even though this is a trans woman that Will Ferrell has known for a long time and was a close friend and coworker. So to have that transphobia come out there, it's one of those things that like Will feels like, oh my God, I did this. Like I tried to make fun and, make a bit of a scene and just have fun. And I ended up putting you in the crosshairs, and it tears him up inside because like, he wants to, have fun and take the edge off. but still just doesn't want to hurt his friend, and realize that in that moment, yeah, he accidentally stumbled and actually, caused some hurt. But Harper, she's understanding, like she's faced it before, but she tries to like also walk Will Ferrell through it to let him know that, when you face this online, it's like, yeah, you're going to get a lot of it, and you kind of more or less have to brush it off, but at the same time, you can't just treat it as nothing. Like there is something there, and it does linger, and it does hurt, and it is something that has to be addressed, and it's approached in like in a very mature way, where it's like the bias is acknowledged there, because like at one point Harper reads off a mean tweet directed at Will from that event, saying that Will is like he's become like a socialist Marxist, whatever the names that people associate with those who align themselves with trans people and show trans allyship. And Will's reaction is just kind of like, like Harper asks him, like, how does that make you feel? And he's just like, I don't really feel anything. That's just a nonsense statement. And Harper's just like, well, it's not to me, because I get stuff like that all the time, and it's not good. You can't just brush it off like that, and you gotta like consider that aspect. So while Will does get very vulnerable with admitting like he doesn't know quite how to navigate all this and is still learning along the way, the more he does try to put Harper more at ease. Like at one point they go out to dinner and they dress up entirely different from how they usually look. Like they try to go out to a fancy restaurant, so Will kind of like tries to take a little bit of like the attention off by dressing up as the most absurd type of character that you wouldn't usually associate with Will Ferrell. And it kind of like it almost kind of like feels like they're both going on a covert dinner. And I think it was very sweet the way that that like Harper brings up how she brings up everything that Will has done for her up to that point, and stresses that, look, most allies wouldn't do this for a trans person, and most trans people wouldn't have this level of support. But still having it there, still having a friend there who's willing to be there with you through thick and thin, and just stick with it, even like when like the spotlight's on you, that it manages to help Harper come out of her shell a little bit more. Especially like for launching herself into these somewhat dangerous situations. Like at one point she goes to a small town bar, which would seem like not a good spot, not a very safe spot to go to. And there's some intensity there, because she can feel at the moment that she walks in, and there's Trump campaign flags on the wall. And she's uncertain of like this situation where I believe that they were in a bar in Oklahoma. So she's not quite sure how this is going to go down. But as she starts talking to other bar patrons there, and kind of like easing her way into conversations and just kind of like casually bringing up that she's trans, she kind of eases into it. And it's one of those things where she just kind of like, she says like, hey, Will, stay outside. I don't want your protection initially. I want to see if I can navigate this on my own. And eventually, after being in there for a while, she just calls him Will Ferrell. It's like, okay, it's cool. Why don't you come on in, and we can surprise all these people. Will Ferrell's here and all that. And yeah, like Harper becomes increasingly more comfortable with opening up to Will as the film goes on. Like obviously, like they have no problem cracking jokes with each other. Like there's a great running gag about how Will really wants Dunkin' Donuts, and Harper will never pull over for them. But Harper literally lets Will visit like her dark place, like when she felt at her lowest, and it's still tough for her. Like when she visits this particular location that just it feels like almost like a cave of her sorrows. She's kind of like crying about it, but like Will's just kind of like, yeah, you opened up to me, you showed me this, and even when like Harper admits like, there's still secrets that I want to keep from you, Will finds just the right moment to joke about it and says like, well, I'm gonna find them. You like that. I know you have a secret about a good record store, but I'm gonna find it. I'm gonna get it out of you. So yeah, it's very charming. It's very, very sweet. It's very sincere, but also very honest and blunt at times. With Will Ferrell just basically trying to figure out how to be an ally to trans people without being, that typical, like that kind of like, obnoxious, like cringy type of trans ally who does nothing but spout catchphrases, and they wear all like the trans flag all over themselves, and they keep shouting like trans rights and stuff like that. And I think that's more like a different dynamic with Will and Harper, because like they're both like middle-aged people who feel like, like they don't have the same eccentricities, even though Will does, still have a little bit of that acting prowess in him, where he can still like shout and still make stuff funny. But they're, they realize, that they're older, and like the world is going to be much different from them, but they still have a very optimistic outlook on life. Like I really like the fact that Harper did bring up how, she still wants to she still wants to date. She wants to go out there and maybe find someone else that she can pick up at a bar, spend a night with, and talk about how stupid the movie last night was that they watched. And she realized that might be a little bit corny, but that's like one of the wonderful things that she would want to experience in life again. And it doesn't seem like it's too impossible. At least like like she realized that, like I'm in my 60s, the clock is ticking here, but hey, if it's ticking, at least she can have someone like Will Ferrell by her side to constantly be there for her and listen to her and still crack some jokes and have some fun with every once in a while. So yeah, it's a wonderful friendship that's worth documenting, and I think is a fairly important documentary to show just how easy it is to be a trans ally to that degree. Because I think like a lot of people have like this misconception where like they're not sure, and they're fearful about acting around a trans person. Like they worry that they're going to say the wrong thing. But at least from like Harper's perspective, the way that she goes about it, like at one point she's shaking hands with somebody and they misgender her, and she's just kind of like, well, I'm not a sir, I'm a man, and I'm a ma'am, and like it's like, oh, okay, and she kind of like jokes like, you want to try that again? Like, yeah, sure, and then it goes easily that. So yeah, it's like misgendering is not the end of the world, so long as you don't, as long as it's a mistake and you don't mean it, obviously. So just, and it seems like such an obvious thing for those who are like used to being around trans people, but I think having it be like a more like vocal and interpretation, and to show these very important aspects of what it is to be like a trans ally, and have like Will Ferrell being behind it, I think makes the documentary a little bit more essential and important, where I think it's going to go a long way towards towards just acceptance of those who transition. So yeah, on that level alone, like, yeah, the film is worth watching, but it's also just worth watching just because it's sweet and it's funny, and I burst out laughing a few times at just Will's just ease of jokes that he has on this road trip. So yeah, it was just a genuinely sweet film to watch unfold, and I'm so glad that this relationship between Will and Harper has remained strong all these years and continues to go pretty damn strong. So Will and Harper is currently playing on Netflix, just like his three daughters. Success wanted to check this doc out. Glad it sounds quite funny. It is, yeah. And naturally funny too. I think that's the most important thing. I think because like some people might think that like Will Ferrell can only be funny if he has like the right script and writers, but no, he can make like some casual jokes pretty well here. There's another great bit I forgot to mention here, but there's that like I said, there's a few cameos here. There's one cameo they have with who's Will Forte, I believe, and they end up like discussing MacGruber, which they were working on like about I think like a decade ago when they started filming this. And they end up going in a hot air balloon to just like take in the scenery, and they start hearing dogs below them. And Will just looks down and just shouts like shut your dogs up. The way that like someone would yell across the street from like an apartment building or something like that. Yeah, it's just genuinely sweet. Just a very, very heartfelt and very, very important film for trans acceptance. I feel like knowing that like Will Ferrell is behind this, because like, yeah, like when Will Ferrell shows up, of course everyone grabs just like, oh, Will Ferrell. But then of course he's like, yeah, hey, this is my friend Harper, and she's transitioned. Oh, I should have mentioned that in the review too. But like the other thing I like too is that there are moments where like Will just do that, where he's just like, here's my friend Harper, she's transitioned. But at one point, like he meets with like a politician during a Pacers game, and he introduces Harper that way, and he kind of has that moment where he's kind of like, oh, I should have. You know what I should have done? I should have asked him what he thought about trans people. Oh, I should have asked that. And Harper's just kind of like, nah, you didn't have to. You basically did what I wanted. You stood up for me. You introduced me. You didn't shy away from the fact that I was trans, and that's all you really have to do in the end. I think it was also kind of fortunate too that like Will got to announce at a Pacers game one time, and he tried to lean into introducing Harper, but like the mic cut off and went back to the game like after like a few seconds of him going into his bit, or it's like Will, it's over. No one's listening. They can't hear you. Yeah, just very sweet film. All right, so we'll do a let me water up here and then we'll recap. So yeah, all right, let's go through the recap here. What do we cover on today's show? Well, we cover The Wild Robot, the latest film from DreamWorks Animation, which is definitely one of their best. It's a beautiful looking film and has a pitch perfect script that manages to get a lot of material out of the original kids book. Must watch film. We also talked about Speak No Evil, the American remake of the Danish film about a family who is terrorized by another family who tries to kidnap children. It does have a lot of the same scenes, and it has a great performance by James McAvoy, but all of the darker psychological and psychosexual drama that was in the original Danish version is completely removed from this American version that trades it in for an action horror film by the end, which just didn't sit right with me. I also reviewed His Three Daughters, a chamber drama about three daughters trying to deal with the death of their dad. It plays like a really good stage play, and it has some fantastic performances from Carrie Coon, Natasha Lyonne, and Elizabeth Olsen. They are worth watching for the film alone, and they occupy most of the film, so that's a good thing. We also reviewed A Different Man, a film about a man with neurofibromatosis, only to be approached by a man with real-life neurofibromatosis, and it turns the disability drama on its head with a complex satirization of that entire subgenre. It's worth watching just because it gives a lot for the mind to munch on. And finally, I reviewed Will and Harper, the documentary about Will Ferrell and Harper Steele as they try to navigate their relationship now that Harper has transitioned into a woman. Very sweet, very funny, very heartfelt documentary, and hopefully it will go a fairly long way for trans acceptance and trans rights. So yeah, among all those films, probably the only one I really didn't like was Speak No Evil, and even then it's only because there's a much better original film. But among all those films, I would say the one definitely that you need to see without question is The Wild Robot. Like I said, top tier DreamWorks. I get the feeling that it might be this year's best animated film. We'll have to wait and see how the Wallace and Gromit film plays out later this year, and the Lord of the Rings animated film we got coming out in December. We'll have to see how those films play. I get the feeling though the Wild Robot still might come out on top. So if you have to see one film this weekend, definitely make it Wild Robot at the theater. But if you're at home, be sure to check out Will and Harper and His Three Daughters. Those are two great films currently playing on Netflix. And if you're still at the theater, yeah, go see A Different Man. Or if you just want to scream at the theater screen, if you want to be in a theater with a lot of people shouting back, yeah, go see Speak No Evil. I'm not gonna speak too much ill of it. I realize it does have an audience, and I don't hate the film in that regard. I just feel like it's definitely not as good as the original. Definitely not as good. So if you'd like to see written reviews of all three films are over on my website at movieswithmark.com. So be sure to stay tuned. Coming into October here, I'm not sure when I will be streaming, but we have a lot of films that will be coming up that I'll be covering. For sure, I know what I'm covering next month will be Heretic, a film with a man who traps two women inside his house and forces them through a weird maze. And I will also be reviewing The Apprentice, the Donald Trump film that Donald Trump tried to ban and failed to. So we got that coming out with more Sebastian Stan. So we're getting a lot of Sebastian Stan after A Different Man and the upcoming Trump film. And I think I might get that film early because I think, if I remember hearing correctly, that's going to be one of the first like big films being pushed for like for awards this year, which I don't know. It might it might be up for Best Actor. We'll just have to see once I finally get around to see the film. So if you would like to stay up to date on those types of films, which will be coming up here, and there will be a lot coming up this award season. It gets probably the busiest season of the year is November. And even then it's mostly like it's early November because like a lot of like awards films will try to push themselves into those early screenings because Thanksgiving gets crowded and then December gets even more crowded with commercial films. So there's a lot. November is my busiest time of the year, without question. Like outside of like Thanksgiving and all that, that's going to be the busiest time of the year. So it might bleed over more into October as well. So to stay up to date on all that, be sure to subscribe to this channel. Be sure to check out movieswithmark.com to read my written reviews and essays. I also have a Patreon, which I do post some of the stuff that I do through my videos, but it's mostly for my books. I'm currently writing a book on Saturday morning cartoons, which I am updating with new chapters over on my Patreon. I try to upload about 2 each day when I can, and it's getting pretty high up there. Like currently, I'm working on my drafts. It's in like the early 2000s right now, so I'm getting very close to the end of finishing this book. And if you're a Patreon subscriber, you can get a copy of that book that I'm going to try to get out there. Publish as quickly as I can as soon as I'm done writing it and editing it. Hopefully, I'll have it in time for Christmas. Hopefully. I only think I have maybe about like a little under 100 pages left. Like I think, I'm trying to remember where I last left off. I think I'm currently in the middle of covering the rest of SpongeBob. So like after that, it's going to be a little bit more like Invader Zim and Avatar and a few more after that. And then I want to write a few like epilogues and like prologues into the book. So yeah, it's definitely going to be a big book. It's going to be a massive book on Saturday morning cartoons that I hope to get out there soon. And those who are supporting me on Patreon will get a copy as soon as it's done. I will get it sent out there immediately. So if you want to be a part of that, go head on over to Patreon. Otherwise, just if you want to show any support, just like this video, like all the other reviews and video essays. I got some more that I'm working on that I'm debating on releasing. The thing is, like, I do have like for video essay ideas, I do have a lot that I'm considering and that I've recorded, but also ones that I'm mulling over whether there's enough research on there, whether I covered enough of the topic. So I do scrutinize a lot. So they don't come as often, but that's only because I'm trying to work on them as much as I can. So yeah, I will be back in the next few weeks because we'll have a lot of films to talk about in October. Like I said, Heretic and The Apprentice and everything coming out this award season. So yeah, thanks everyone for stopping by, and be sure to check out the channel because I'll try to get some of these reviews processed into basically like cut up the stream into like different reviews, so you don't have to come back to this particular stream in particular. You don't have to scrub through it all the time and go through all the ads. I try to keep the ads conservative here. I know a lot of YouTubers don't, but I realize that a lot of people won't be watching if the ads are not, if there's too many ads, so I don't try to do that. So yeah, be sure to stay tuned next time for more movie reviews, and I will see you next time. Later.